The disappearance of Jonathan Blake, a real-life mystery. Have you ever heard a story so impossible that it feels like it has to be fiction? A man walks into a building, dozens of people see him enter. Minutes pass, then hours, but he never comes out. There are no back exits, no secret tunnels, no logical explanation. And yet he's gone. This is the case of Jonathan Blake, a British businessman who in 1971 entered his office building in London, only to vanish without a trace. No one saw him leave, there were no signs of foul play, and despite a massive investigation, no evidence was ever found. It was as if reality itself had swallowed him whole. What happened to Jonathan Blake? Let's uncover the terrifying possibilities. It was a crisp autumn morning, October 19, 1971. Jonathan Blake, a 39-year-old financial consultant, arrived at Barrington House, a sleek, modern office building in the heart of London. Security cameras caught him walking through the glass doors at exactly 8:52 a.m. He greeted the receptionist, took the elevator to the 12th floor, and headed to his office. A normal day. Colleagues saw him enter his office, coffee in hand. He even made a phone call to a client at 9:14 a.m. And then, nothing. He missed his 10 a.m. meeting. Calls went unanswered. Emails weren't read. By noon, a secretary knocked on his office door. No response. She tried the handle. It was unlocked. She stepped inside and froze. Jonathan Blake's suit jacket was draped over his chair. His briefcase sat neatly on the desk. His coffee, still warm, rested beside it. But the office was empty. Jonathan Blake was nowhere to be found. At first, people assumed he had simply stepped out, maybe for a smoke, maybe for an early lunch. But then hours passed. The security team reviewed the building's footage. They saw him enter that morning, but there was no video of him leaving. Every stairwell, elevator, hallway checked, no sign of him. Barrington House had only one entrance. The back doors were locked at all times. A full search of the building revealed nothing, not even a clue as to how he could have escaped. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. As news spread, theories piled up. Some believed he had been kidnapped, taken through a hidden exit, or smuggled out in a supply cart. Others suspected he had been murdered, his body somehow hidden within the building's walls. But then an eerie detail emerged. Barrington House had no secret exits, no maintenance tunnels, no way to leave without being seen. And then came the strangest revelation. Jonathan Blake's office keycard had not been used since he entered the building that morning. It was still in his desk, but that wasn't the most disturbing part. According to official records, Jonathan Blake didn't exist. The passport number he had used to book flights never issued. His driver's license invalid, his birth certificate nowhere to be found. The people who worked with him, those who had known him for years, were questioned. And one by one, they began to doubt their own memories. Had they really known Jonathan Blake? Or had he been something else entirely? To this day, no logical explanation has ever been found. Some claim he was part of a top-secret government experiment, that his very existence had been erased. Others whisper that he never existed at all, a fabricated person placed in society for a purpose unknown. And then, there's the most terrifying theory. What if Jonathan Blake had walked into something that wasn't meant for human eyes? A door that shouldn't have been open, a glitch in reality, a place where once entered you simply vanish. No goodbye, no escape, no return, just... So what really happened to Jonathan Blake? A government cover-up, a parallel dimension, or something even more horrifying? Tell us your theory in the comments. And if you love real-life horror mysteries, don't forget to subscribe, because some disappearances should never be forgotten. The vanishing figure, a night I'll never forget. Have you ever had that strange, indescribable feeling that someone or something was watching you? It's more than paranoia. It's that uncanny chill crawling down your spine, the sense that you're no longer alone, even when there's no one else around. This isn't a story about haunted houses or ghosts. Those are just fictional tales meant to scare you. No, what I'm about to share really happened to me, and to this day, I still can't explain it. It was a cold, quiet evening, the kind where the silence feels heavier than usual. I was walking home, taking my usual shortcut through narrow, dimly lit alleyways that snaked through my town. It wasn't my first time on this path. I must have walked it 100 times before. It always felt safe, routine even. But that night was different, and I felt it almost the second I turned onto the first stretch of the alley. The air seemed heavier, the silence too sharp. I brushed it off as nothing more than the change in season. It's just colder than usual, I told myself. But looking back, I should have trusted that gut feeling. Something wasn't right. The first sign wasn't anything remarkable. In fact, I almost didn't notice it. It was the crunch of leaves, a faint sound behind me. I stopped in my tracks, listening. Nothing. Maybe it was just the rustling of the wind, or an echo of my own steps bouncing off the walls of the buildings surrounding me. I shrugged it off and kept walking. But then, there it was again. The same faint crunch, perfectly timed with my steps. It wasn't loud enough to alarm me, but it felt deliberate. My pace quickened subconsciously. My heart started beating just a little harder, the kind of sensation you feel when a chill touches the back of your neck. At that moment, I told myself it was probably just a stray animal, maybe a cat digging through debris. But that explanation didn't feel convincing. I didn't hear any scurrying or movement typical of an animal. It was steady, controlled. I glanced back once, expecting to see nothing but an empty walkway bathed in moonlight. And at first, that's exactly what I saw, just a still and empty street. But something about the shadows at the edge of the alley didn't sit right with me. They looked thicker, darker somehow, as if they were hiding something. But when I stared long enough, there was nothing there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. I kept walking, my pace a little quicker now, though not enough to seem frantic. And then, I noticed it, out of the corner of my eye, a figure. At first, I wasn't completely sure I'd seen anything. It was far down the street and barely visible, but there was something, a vague, unmoving silhouette standing near the edge of where the light from the nearest street lamp faded into darkness. I froze mid-step. My brain tried to rationalize it immediately. Maybe someone else was walking home. Maybe it was just a shadow cast by an old tree or a street sign. I wasn't being followed. It couldn't be that. Still, I couldn't help but feel this heavy weight in my chest, my instincts screaming at me to pay attention. I squinted, trying to make out the shape, but it was just too far, too indistinct. I turned quickly, pretending not to notice, and kept walking. But my mind was spinning now. My ears were on high alert, listening for the faintest of sounds. And then, there it was, the subtle crunch of leaves again. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. When I glanced back a second time, I felt my heart stop. The figure, it was closer now, still unmoving, still vague, but undeniably more present than it was before. I blinked hard, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it didn't change. It was there. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe just someone stopping to look at their phone. Maybe someone harmless, heading somewhere entirely unrelated to me. But deep down, I didn't believe that. There was something too unnatural about their stillness, something deliberate. Their presence felt wrong, like they shouldn't have been there at all. I started walking faster. As I passed under another flickering streetlight, I glanced back for a third time. And just like before, the figure was closer. But no matter how much I tried to focus, I couldn't get a clear look at them. The shadows seemed to move and cling to it, or maybe hide it entirely. Whatever, or whoever, didn't make a sound. No footsteps, no shifting weight, just silence. The silence was almost suffocating now. My pace quickened even more, my breathing coming a little harder. I turned a corner abruptly, hoping to put the figure out of my sight. But as soon as the road straightened again, I glanced back involuntarily. It was still there, closer than before, and this time I felt it, that distinct, unmistakable feeling that it knew I was there. Every step I took felt heavier than the last. My mind raced through dozens of possibilities, none of which made sense. I thought about calling out, asking if someone was there, but the words got stuck in my throat. Something about speaking felt wrong, as if acknowledging it might give it power. I can't explain why, but the silence felt safer. The flickering streetlights seemed to mock me as I moved through the alley. A tricky dance of light and shadow made every corner more ominous than the last. I quickened my pace, but not to the point of a sprint. I didn't want to seem panicked. But inside, I was panicked. And then suddenly it was gone. I froze in place, staring down the alley where I had last seen it. The figure, the shadow, whatever it had been, had completely disappeared. For a brief second, relief washed over me. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was so stuck in my own mind that I'd conjured it out of paranoia. But that relief didn't last for long, because as I turned again to continue on my way, I realized the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and in the corner of my vision, I swore I felt something shifting in the shadows just beyond my sight. I didn't run. I wanted to, but I didn't. Instead, I forced myself to walk calmly the rest of the way home. With every step, I fought against the urge to turn around. I told myself that whatever it was, real or otherwise, it wasn't following me anymore. I locked my front door behind me that night with shaky hands, heart hammering in my chest. But I knew I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Who would believe a story like this? That I was followed by nothing? By shadows? Even now, as I tell this to you, I still don't have answers. Who or what was that figure? Was it just someone out for a walk, a trick of the light, or something far stranger? Why was it silent? How could it vanish so completely? And why, no matter how much time passes, do I still feel unsettled every time I replay that night in my mind? I'll never be able to walk that same route again without thinking about that experience. Without wondering if that figure, whether it was real or imagined, is still out there, waiting for someone to notice. That night changed how I see the world around me. Sometimes, the most terrifying things aren't the ones that go bump in the night. They're the moments when the ordinary becomes unexplainable, when shadows seem alive and silence feels threatening. But let me leave you with this question. Have you ever had an experience like this? A moment when you felt the world shift, if only slightly, and you weren't sure if you were safe anymore? If so, you're not alone. And here's the thing, not all the strange moments from that night ended with the vanishing figure. There's something else that happened, a detail I haven't shared yet. Something I've kept to myself because even now, it still doesn't feel real. If you want to know what it is, stay tuned for my next video. Trust me, this story isn't over yet. Let me know in the comments. What do you think that figure was? A supernatural being? A stranger with sinister intentions? Or was it all in my head? Believe me when I say, the truth might be stranger than you think.